So I recently came across this video from an atheist philosopher, his name is Alex Malpass, arguing that Jesus, yes, Jesus supposedly sort of drops the ball on one of his most famous teachings, the Golden Rule. You know, the one that says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So he says it's stupid.
It's a stupid thing to say.
It's selfish.
Treating everyone like you want to be treated is like selfish.
And that it misses the mark entirely.
Like Jesus actually just gets it wrong, just drops the ball on the most obvious main crucial thing he ever said. He actually just gets that wrong.
But is it possible he's actually the one that's got pretty much everything backward here? And spoiler alert, the answer is yes. And by the way, you want to stick around to the end of this video because not only are we going to be dismantling every single point that he makes, we're also going to uncover, I think, a deeper truth about the Golden Rule that a lot of people miss entirely. Okay, so let's watch the video in full and then we'll do some commentary.
First of all, it doesn't sound like a very good commandment to me anyway, right? It's actually quite self-centered because it's kind of got it backwards, right? You shouldn't treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. You should treat your neighbor as they want to be treated. Right? Jesus actually just gets it wrong, just drops the ball on the most obvious main crucial thing he ever said. He actually just gets that wrong. Treating everyone like you want to be treated is like selfish, frankly. It's like not empathetic towards what other people might want. So you.
When I first heard this, I was like, is he like acting like someone else? Because Alex Malpass is actually a really good philosopher, atheist philosopher, but like, I didn't know if he was being serious, and apparently he is. This is an actual argument that he makes and finds plausible. And again, we're going to break all of this down in just a minute.
You should hope that other people treat you like you want to be treated, but you should fear them treating you like they want to be treated, right? Because they might want anything. Who knows what they want?
You could be a masochist, right?
Yeah, exactly. They might want to have all of their money stolen. I don't know what they want, right? But that's not cool. I don't want to tether my...
Yeah, I wonder if there's another way to look at all this.
Treatment to what somebody else wants. So Jesus gets that wrong. It's a stupid thing to say.
Stupid thing to say.
So anyway... Moving on from that, supposing he said it the right way around, still, it's not clear that you can really derive the rest of ethics just from that one sentence. I mean, it's right. It really does depend. A lot of stuff depends on what's going on. And it just seems to me that like the fundamental problem here is that God doesn't issue commands on every old thing. Right? God doesn't tell me whether or not I should punch you in the face right now.
All right, deep breaths. We need some deep breaths here. We just heard an atheist philosopher say that the cornerstone of Christian ethics is stupid. Okay. And before we all sort of collectively facepalm at what we just heard, maybe there's something actually that we can learn from this. And maybe the problem is not necessarily with the Golden Rule, but with a sort of misunderstanding about what it actually means. So let's go ahead and break this down. Let's go point by point. And along the way, I think we're going to discover actually the true brilliance of what the Golden Rule is actually about. So let's go ahead and start. Let's start with the claim that treating others as you want to be treated is actually selfish. And I think the irony here is actually really palpable. The Golden Rule is like literally all about empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So when Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, he's not suggesting that like you impose your desires on someone else. Rather, he's inviting you to consider how your actions affect someone else, using your own experience as a guide. And so Alex, he suggests here that we should treat others as they want to be treated. And that sounds good on the surface, but I mean, how do you really know what other people want? Like you might think that you do, but you also might not know exactly what they want. And so if we only focus on what others might want, we'd actually be paralyzed by uncertainty. So like we'd be forever guessing and like possibly enabling harmful desires on their part. But the Golden Rule, on the other hand, actually provides a very clear and compassionate starting point. You consider your actions through the lens of shared human experience. It's a universal principle because it's based on common human dignity between all of us. Let's take this a little bit further. So suppose that we did exactly what our atheist friend Alex Malpass here suggests. Let's treat people based on what they want. The problem is that not all desires are actually good for you. So some people might desire things that are really harmful, really bad, not only to themselves, but to other people. So if someone wants to be treated badly, should we actually like accommodate that just because this guy said so? I don't think we should. Part of the point in bringing this up is that Alex's standard here is not actually any better at all than the Golden Rule. But one thing that he's missing here is that the Golden Rule actually assumes that people generally desire what is good, because that's basically how we're wired. Like we live in a fallen world and those desires can get twisted. But the beauty of the golden rule is that it calls us to recognize the sort of inherent goodness that should sort of guide our actions, even when others' desires are disordered. So in essence, it's basically a call to treat others with respect and love that aligns with what is truly good, not just what you like happen to desire. I think this point alone actually kind of undermines like his entire case, but the plot is about to actually get a lot thicker. So to really understand the golden rule, we need to look at the broader context in which Jesus said it. So the golden rule happens in Matthew 7:12, right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, which is a series of teachings that go way beyond like just do unto others. So Jesus is laying out like a radically new way of living, one that includes turning the other cheek, loving your enemies, and giving to those in need. This isn't just some like random moral tip. It's a vision for a completely transformed life. So Alex seems to think that like the golden rule is just like some sort of standalone statement that you can just sort of poke holes in. But in reality, it's the capstone of a much larger ethical framework that like, just look at the context in which the golden rule actually happens. Jesus is not just saying like, hey guys, we should be nice to each other. He's calling us to live a life of radical love, of radical humility, and of radical self-sacrifice. The surrounding context around the golden rule shows us that the golden rule is part of a broader call to live in a way that reflects the character of God, a God who loves unconditionally and who calls us to all do the same. But now let's turn back to the point of how like we should treat others based on what they want, not on what we want. But let's pause here for a second because, okay, so do we really want to base our ethical decisions on a sort of guessing game about what someone else desires? Like, what if they want something harmful? Again, what if their desires are misguided or disordered or like their desires are malfunctioning? That's not empathy. That's actually enabling. The golden rule, on the other hand, provides a very stable foundation because it's rooted in the idea that despite our differences, there are universal aspects of human experience like dignity, respect, and love that we all share. And at least when our brains are sort of functioning properly. But when Jesus tells us to treat others as we want to be treated, he's telling us to consider those universal needs, not just to like play some weird psychological charades trying to guess each other's weird or fleeting desires. So another point of contention that Alex raises here is that whether or not the golden rule can actually serve as a basis for all of ethics. And guess what? So like, no Christian has actually ever said that it does. Like the golden rule is a guiding principle, but it's not a comprehensive moral code by itself. It's the foundation of a house. Like that's what we should think of it as, strong and essential, but it's not the whole thing. It's not the whole structure. The rest of the ethical teachings in the Bible build on this foundation, providing, I think, clarity and direction to how we live out the golden rule in other aspects of life. So while one might argue that the golden rule falls short as a sort of full ethical system, the truth is that it was literally never meant to do that, and no Christian has ever thought that. So this is just a weird and puzzling straw man. Okay, now finally, there's the claim that God's commandments are somehow lacking because they don't cover every possible scenario, like whether or not you should punch someone in the face. But the Bible is not some like comprehensive morality checklist. It's a guide to living a life that honors God and loves other people. And yes, that does mean that we have to use our brains, at least a little bit, and that's entirely okay. And it's actually really, really good for us. So we should definitely do that. God's commandments are intentionally broad so that they can be applied across cultures, contexts, and centuries. The command to love your neighbor doesn't need some sort of weird subclause for every potential situation. It's a principle that we're meant to apply with wisdom and discernment. And frankly, if you're still wondering like whether punching someone in the face is okay, you might have missed the point entirely of like the entire New Testament. So, maybe time to go back to the drawing board on that one. All right, so after all of the, frankly, just bad arguments from Alex on this point, where do we find ourselves? The so-called stupid teaching is actually completely ethically sound. Like there's no problem with it at all. Look at the surrounding context. Just apply just a tiny bit of charity. The golden rule, it's not just like a really good idea. It's actually the heartbeat of a moral life, a life that looks beyond self-interest to the well-being of others. But now here's the plot twist that I promised you earlier. So the real brilliance of the golden rule isn't just in its simplicity. It's actually in its depth. Okay, it calls us to something greater than mere ethical compliance. It calls us to love God as God loves. It challenges us to go beyond just the bare minimum, to live lives that reflect the radical, transformative love that Jesus embodied. And when we live that way, when we live out the golden rule, we don't just follow a rule, we actually transform the world around us completely. Oh, and then lastly, remember that Christianity is true.